Welcome. It has just gone 7 p.m, Wednesday the 13th of April, and you are watching episode 43 of Regional Wrap. Regional Wrap, providing an insight on the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, protecting koalas or banishing man from the bush, is my guest, author and ecologist, Jurskis. Vic graduated from the Australian National University with a degree as a Bachelor of Science in Forestry and went on to work for the New South Wales Forestry Commission. He was appointed as a professional forester in 1978 and worked on all types of native forest and woodlands throughout New South Wales. He transferred to Eden in 1997 as officer in charge of the Forestry Commission's Regional Research Centre, where he led a program of ecological research for all coastal and highland forests south of Sydney. In 2002, Vic was appointed Forestry Commission's Regional Planning Manager at Eden, before being appointed silviculturist for the Commission's Native Forest Division, responsible for all aspects of forestry management across the state. He has given independent evidence at 3 parliamentary inquiries into land and fire management. Since retiring from the Forestry Commission in 2012, Vic continues to be a published author of scientific articles and presents papers at international conferences. His first book, Fire Stick Ecology, was published in 2015 and received favourable reviews in 2 international scientific journals. Vic's 2020 offering, The Great Koala Scam, Green Propaganda, Junk Science, Government's Waste and Cruelty to Animals, was well received. Vic is a member of the Institute of Forests Australia and the Royal Australian Historical Society. Vic has a passionate desire to reinstate pragmatic scientific land management in Australia, combining traditional knowledge and modern science. Welcome, Vic.
Thanks, Bill.
Just before we get started, we might just get a little bit more information from you, and maybe we can start with, of course, it will be about your history and that of your third book, Siberia to Eden, that you're now writing.
Yeah, it was going to be my second book, and events conspired to change my plans. I had to try and get the Koala Scam book out in time for the New South Wales Koala Inquiry. And I put the important one, Siberia to Eden, on hold. And I'm only just getting back into it now.
That gives an insight of your family's life story and also your past history in regards to being the son of immigrant parents who came out after World War II.
Yeah, well, I was lucky to be part of the World War II refugee contribution to making Australia great, and I find it really disappointing. For example, Dad worked on the Snowy Mountains scheme, and I was born in Coomera, and I lived the first few years of my life at Eagle Hawk Neck, which is basically the site of what's now known as Yukonbean Dam, and that was the greatest infrastructure project that Australia will ever see. It was a fair income renewable energy project, and now we've got Snowy 2.0, which is a disgrace. It's a joke. They claim the Snowy Hydro claims to be producing energy. It uses energy, and it's just designed to prop up a unreliable, intermittent, and unworkable energy scheme that actually, if you did the accounts properly, all the way from mining all the materials and all the transport and construction infrastructure and then the disposal after a very short working life, these fake renewables just don't add up.
I think the other thing is too, with the old snow scheme, it was a big conduit for many immigrants who came to this country. I mean, there was a huge number of immigrants arriving after the war who were employed on that project. And the other big thing, I think, is it was a project that was designed sort of with a lot of thinking involved. It wasn't one of those projects that got written on the back of a napkin like our NBN with Rudd, and then a light bulb moment by someone like Turnbull. It was a well thought out. It was years in the planning, making, and then the delivery sort of thing, and it delivered big time. But all these other things have just been sort of whims, and we've pumped in heaps and heaps of money, but actually what we've got to get out is a very poor return. So it behoves how poorly we have come along since that's sort of the way that sort of project was designed and came to fruition.
Yeah, you're absolutely dead right. It was really well thought out, and it was a complete package. It wasn't about one, simple issue. It was about water conservation, irrigation, and power generation, and the whole box and dice. And it's basically been destroyed by the new green ideology, where instead of using our scarce natural resources, it's mostly scarce water. Sometimes there's too much. So that's the other aspect that I didn't mention. It was flood mitigation, irrigation, energy generation, all combined in one, all well thought out. And now we're not only wasting the irrigation capacity by sending it out to sea to no advantage. We're actually using it to fill up a huge artificial freshwater lake near Adelaide. It was created by building barrages to destroy a natural tidal estuary where there used to be a big commercial fishery based on jewfish
but now it's freshwater carp. Harry the carp.
That's absolutely right.
An exotic pest is now the favoured fish of that area. Like, give us a break.
Yeah.
The other thing about Snowy too is it's not finished yet, but I also wonder about the impact on irrigation, because if you're going to have to keep pumping the water back, that means you're going to have to deny some flow to the irrigators and downstream if you're going to keep pumping it back. So, I mean, we've got people on the Murray now complaining about the poor allocation quantities of water because of the environmental flow. It's going to be interesting to see how Snowy 2 is actually going to play out for irrigators in the future.
Yeah, there's all sorts of things wrong with it, but the main thing wrong with it is that it doesn't produce energy; it costs energy, and people forget the absolutely huge amount of energy. Like Snowy Hydro was skiting about shifting 700,000 cubic meters of dirt just recently and blowing up this and blowing up that. That all uses up fossil fuel powered energy, and that will never ever be repaid because Snowy 2 will never generate any energy. It only uses energy to prop up fake renewables.
We'll move on now to our topic, our little cuddly friends that some people adore them, but I find them quite boring and if anything, smelly when close up to them. So, so what drove the initial inquiry into protection of the koalas?
I'm not sure which initial inquiry you mean, but I can tell you that in 1990, New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife Service started a campaign of using koalas to increase their estate at the expense of multiple use state forest. And
that's loggers in that.
Sorry, I missed that.
Is that logging and all those sort of activities?
Yeah, well, they basically national parks started using the koala in 1990 to take country out of logging and grazing and multiple use, and put it into their national park estate.
So that was the first start of using the koala. So maybe you can just give us a bit of overview with the koala in regards to its sort of initial numbers and that at the time of, say, settlement and thereafter, and the range compared to when people or the authorities perceive there to be a problem.
Yeah, no problem. When Europeans arrived in Australia, they didn't know about koalas for the first 10 years. The first written record referring to koala was 10 years after
settlement,
after Europeans arrived at Sydney, and it wasn't actually a sighting of a koala. It was a ex-convict who had lived with Aborigines in the bush, was guiding a young explorer to the southwest of Sydney, and he actually showed him some koala fecal pellets on the ground, and gave him a rough description of the animal that produced them. And that was also at the same time when they Europeans first saw a lyrebird. So it was John Wilson was the ex-convict, and he showed John Price, the governor's offside of the explorer. He told him about koalas, but the first live one wasn't seen by Europeans until 15 years after they arrived in Sydney, when one was brought in with the help from Aboriginals. They brought one into Sydney in 1803. But like explorers didn't see koalas. Today there are many more koalas over a much wider area than there were when Europeans arrived in Australia. They're a naturally rare animal, and they're an eruptive species that if they weren't so cute, they'd be recognised as a pest species that responds to disturbance, and in particular disruption of mild burning in the forests.
Just there, I think a lot of people would be surprised at how long the first settlers were locked into that Sydney area, and we didn't actually even get over the Great Divide until the 1820s. So we didn't range that far. We did along the coast, of course, but inland we were pretty well stifled by the Great Divide and access. In regards to koalas, if they weren't there, would the environment notice that they were gone? Like, would the environment suffer? Like, if you take some animals out of the environment, it impacts adversely on other species or the general ecology. But with koalas, I mean, they sit up on top of a gum tree, nibble a few leaves and sleep for 20 hours a day. what's their role in life?
Well, their role in life is the same as any other animal, is to make a living. and the reason that they're naturally rare is because and this was recognised when the first one was brought into Sydney in 1803. The reason the koalas are naturally rare is because they have a very they rely on a scarce resource to feed them, which is soft young eucalypt shoots. And the Sydney Gazette in 1803 said, they wrote something along the lines that the koala was excessively nice in his choice of foliage. So the reason that koalas actually erupted into plagues, and the first time that there were any numbers of koalas seen was in the 1830s in the Blue Mountains, or the foothills of the Blue Mountains west of Sydney. And the reason that they suddenly become visible and come into large numbers was because after Aboriginal burning was disrupted, dense young stringy bark forests grew up in the foothills of the Blue Mountains. And those dense young forests had lots of soft young shoots, so koalas bred up. And in response to that, Aborigines actually developed a new technique for catching them, because they'd suddenly become a good food resource. So koalas developed, the Aboriginal people developed a noose made out of stringy bark on the end of a sapling pole, which they could put over the head of the koala, put it around its neck and twist the pole and drag it down out of the tree. And it's ironic that the researchers that are studying koalas these days and don't understand their history and their ecological history, they're using almost exactly the same technique, except they're using cord and fiberglass or plastic poles to get the koalas down to put collars on them to study their ecology.
So why have we sort of forgotten this sort of information about the original populations and the thing to get into a situation where say a specific group of people want to push a barrow and use the koala as a focus to push their ideology? How's that come about? How have people forgotten the original information in regards to their original numbers and their status?
There's been a lot of effort gone into this. It's there's a koala industry. There's actually it's made up of multinational, multi-million-dollar corporations and entities that actually registered as charities, but they make huge amount of money by frightening people about, telling them that we're going to lose this cute little icon, and they admit to themselves that they use koalas as a flagship, supposedly to promote conservation of other species that aren't so cute, but it's absolute hypocrisy, because like the reason why there's too many koalas, why koalas in plagues, is the same reason why the genuinely endangered species are endangered. The koalas are in plagues because we disrupted frequent mole burning that used to keep the forests healthy, and the koalas in very low sustainable numbers. That same disruption of burning, it's made the trees sick, and it's made the scrub boom, and the scrub understories choke out all the diverse ground covers, all the herbs and grasses and seeds and fungi and things that sustain the truly endangered animals, which rely upon those resources that are being choked out by scrub. Now, Australia is famous for its extinctions of small mammals, and the green ideologists have nearly shut down native forestry in Australia. Like it's finished in Western Australia, or about to finish in Western Australia and Victoria, and usually restricted in the rest of the country. But that industry's been shut down because there's green obsession with trees, and the big lie that that cutting trees down is the root cause of all our environmental problems. All the small mammals that became extinct, they had nothing to do with clearing or forestry. They lived in the semi-arid and arid zones where their habitat, their diverse grassy, low resources, ground story resources were choked out by scrub when Aboriginal burning was disrupted, and either scrub or robust tussock growth choked out those resources. But the Greens have managed with their campaigns to induce this mass hysteria where people think that it's logging and clearing that's causing all our woes, when in fact it's lack of proper sustainable management, and particularly frequent mild burning. So not only lack of biodiversity, but these mega fires now that they're blaming on climate change, everything's blamed on climate change. They've nothing to do with climate change. They had to do with total lack of proper management as a result of the wilderness mentality. And the irony is now that people are trying to jump on the Aboriginal management bandwagon. Like the Mabo decision, it changed the idea about land tenure. It should have changed the idea about land management as well, but it hasn't. We've got, for example, in New South Wales, we've got a Wilderness Act. As the famous bumper sticker has it, the only true wilderness is between a greenie's ears.
I think one of the other things is there's, like with the Queensland government up here, they're looking to increase the land holdings into national parks and forests or protection areas up to 17% of the land mass. That's all well and good. And it's the same in West Australia and Victoria and South Australia, New South Wales. But one of the things that doesn't come with that acquisition of more land is proper funding for management of the land. It's basically their attitude, from what I can gather, is, purchase the land, lock it up and leave it. So leave it to noxious weeds, leave it to feral animals, and keep humans out. Don't even let humans go in there to enjoy, being in the bush. So is that how you see this movement towards acquiring more protected land? That it's never going to be, the department's never going to be resourced to actually manage it, and it's just grow wild and be a mess until it burns down with another major fire.
Yeah, look, there's absolutely no doubt, and no one with any intelligence should have any doubt. Black Summer proved beyond doubt that our conservation paradigm is totally flawed. Lock it up and let it burn has been a proven disaster. Hundreds and hundreds of people have died, and countless millions of animals have died, and the reason we have all the so-called eucalypt diebacks, the reason we have mega fires, the reason we have absolute massive erosion and siltation, the reason we have massive preventable emissions of carbon dioxide from megafires. All our environmental woes are essentially down to that green ideology of lock it up and let it burn. The wilderness mentality is killing the country.
But Australia is not the only place that's sort of suffering from this problem in regards to with pastures through the areas have been logged and in sustainable ways. I mean, yes, if you go back in history, there's a number of techniques they use that probably weren't the best for sustainability and land management, but things always improve. You know, people learn from their mistakes and can manage the forest better and harvest better. But you're talking about some of the diseases that gets into eucalypts, but there's also other problems like overseas. They have similar sort of problems in their forests once they actually withdraw human interaction and forestry from those areas.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a common problem around the world, and it's particularly harmful as far as society goes, human society goes, in the underdeveloped countries where, you know, the huge multinational organisations, the United Nations and all the rest are promoting this lock it up and let it burn conservation paradigm, and they're actually removing people's they're removing the livelihoods of peasants in Australia and European countries, in developed countries. You know, all the people that are being put out of productive work by this ridiculous conservation paradigm, they're supported by, you know, social security and all the rest of it. It's not the same. It's still soul destroying, but at least they can still sustain themselves. You know, the poor old peasants in South America and you know, parts of Africa and that are whose livelihoods are being ruined by lock it up conservation. They've got nothing, absolutely nothing.
In regards to what you're talking about with eucalypt dieback, there's been a number of different diseases in the forest. I think West Australia had a particular big dieback disease, must be 10, 20 years ago. It was in the news a fair bit in West Australia. What are some of the characteristics of problems to our forests?
Yeah, well, diseases don't kill trees. Diseases are symptoms of underlying problems with trees, just the same as koalas. You've mentioned before about chlamydia and so forth with koalas. Chlamydia in koalas is a consequence of poor nutrition as a result of unsustainably dense koala populations and declining forests. Now, forests are declining because they need frequent wildfire to maintain nutrient cycling and healthy soil processes. If you don't have frequent wildfire, you have changes in the soil, the tree roots deteriorate, and the unhealthy trees, as they're declining, they keep reshooting soft young growth all the time. So koalas breed up and they outstrip the resources. As the trees decline further, they can't sustain the koalas, and when you get a drought that frizzles the leaves, as we did in the Federation drought, you know, around 1900, koala populations crashed. But that was blamed on hunting for fur. But the reason the fur industry developed was because there were plagues of koalas that were outstripping their resources and getting sick with diseases from malnutrition and so forth. And it was a humane solution in those days to cull the koalas and use their fur. these days they talk about, you know, giving them the chemical injections and translocating, you know, some of them to reduce the density, but that's not solving the problem. That's only moving the problem. So the like ecologically, koalas are no different to the bark beetles that are getting blamed for, you know, destroying the coniferous forests in North America and so forth. If you have sick trees, there are organisms that can take advantage of them. So those organisms respond in plagues. So koalas, bark beetles, in eucalypt forests, psyllids erupt in sick forests, and bellbirds thrive on psyllids. Bellbirds eat psyllids and they keep other birds out. They control the resource for themselves, so they build up in the colonies. And academics who don't understand ecology, they say that the bellbirds are causing dieback. Same as the ecologists in Victoria say that koala overbrowsing is killing the trees. It's exactly back to front. What's happening is that mismanagement is creating sick trees. Sick trees create a resource for things that eat leaves. Those things build up, but they build up into unsustainable numbers. And when you have natural environmental stress such as drought, the whole system collapses.
You sent us a couple of photos of that, of the leaves on trees. Do you want to talk about those pictures you sent us?
If you wouldn't mind flashing up the photo of the koala at Cape Otway.
Well, we've got let's see.
Oh, okay. Well,
we've got this one. We'll start with the bottom one. There's a koala in a pretty dead-looking tree.
Yeah. Well, that's at Cape Otway, where the koalas are supposedly overbrowsing the trees. And another part of the mythology about the koalas is that you know, that they've got out of control in Victoria because they're all bred from a small amount of you know, a few koalas that were put on islands and allowed to breed up, and they've got a limited genetic diversity. Well, that's all nonsense. The genetic diversity of the Victorian koalas is just as high, or actually higher than the acknowledged natural populations on the so-called Koala Coast in southeast Queensland. You know, there's mythology about everything to do with koalas, genetics, disease, overbrowsing, the whole works. But that koala at Cape Otway is the perfect example of what I was trying to explain to you, that when they thought that koalas were extinct in most of Victoria, they put translocated those koalas from the dense populations on the islands in Western Port Bay back into the bush, thinking that they would re-establish koalas in the wild. And then they so-called protected those forests by excluding fire. Well, all that did was to make the forest sick, make the trees reshoot soft young growth, make the koala populations build up into unsustainable densities. Nothing to do with genetics, nothing to do with their genetic base or the translocations, just simply the same bad management that's causing eruptions in all the rest of their range, not just in Victoria where there were translocations.
So the impression I get, a healthy population of koalas is probably a population that you rarely see.
Absolutely. If you can see koalas, there's something wrong. I'm one of the very few people who's had the privilege to study natural low-density koala populations. We radio tracked koalas at Eden here, and we found that that they were happily living and breeding in you know, in low densities with average home ranges of more than 100 hectares. So each koala had access to tens of thousands of trees. And they're exclusive home ranges, like koala. There's a lot of mythology too about koalas being social animals. Koalas are solitary animals. That's been known right from the start, and they live in very low densities in forests. They didn't live in the valleys that are now regarded as the prime habitat. They invaded those valleys, but originally they were a forest, a rare animal living in the forest on a rare resource of soft young growth, and travelling long distances to seek out that resource. That's why they've got strong limbs and big noses, because their relatively short amount of working day is spent in moving and seeking out that soft young growth that sustains them.
So with the Koala Protection Act that they brought in, and the restrictions and that, what sort of levels do they expect, or they would be happy with, for koalas to get to, so that everyone walking past a bit of bush will see one every time they're out there? What's their goal? Is their goal to get their numbers up to such a level that they're sighted by everyone on almost every day?
Yeah, well, the New South Wales stated goal is to double koala populations. Now, it's a bit of a joke, because they don't know what the koala populations are to start with. New South Wales has made a game out of koala numbers. The National Parks and Wildlife Service has actually interfered with fair income research studies like our radio tracking studies at Eden, because we were finding scientific information about how low density populations actually how they live and how they survive. And they've used absolutely ineffective methods to estimate koala populations. They've used postal surveys to supposedly monitor trends in koala numbers, and they've manipulated those. They've absolutely blatantly manipulated the data to supposedly show that koalas are disappearing from areas outside national parks, areas of state forests and private land, as I said earlier on, in an attempt to increase their estate. And it's quite blatant and obvious, but the sad part about it is that it's working. People actually believe this nonsense about declining koala populations. It's as I said to you, there are more koalas over a wider area than there were when Europeans arrived. None of the explorers, except bar one, Strzelecki, no explorers saw koalas. Koalas didn't live in the grassy valleys, the woodlands that explorers and settlers were looking for, to run their pastoral enterprises.
Because there wasn't any food stuff for them. It wasn't.
That's exactly right. That's right. And until we disrupted Aboriginal burning, and they bred up in the dense young forests in the hills, and invaded the valleys, they didn't live there. Now the experts say that the valleys, the red gum valleys, are the prime koala habitat. Well, they are, because it's completely different to what it was when it was under Aboriginal management, because there's so many young trees that weren't there, and there's so many sick trees turning over soft young growth, allowing koalas to breed up. So the koalas that are supposedly threatened by disease and dog attacks and collisions with vehicles, they're koalas that are actually invading the territory that Europeans originally sought out for their pastoral enterprises, and have since turned into the urban, suburban and rural residential areas. The koalas aren't a natural occupant of those areas.
The Act also identifies a number of tree species in each sort of location. It identifies a number of locations as koala habitats. And then even for each of those locations, it then specifies the types of trees that are in that area or in that region that are basically going to be super protected. Like you can't go and sneeze on them because you'll probably get a big fine. So how arduous is some of this legislation on landowners? Not just farmers and that, but other landowners as well, who might accidentally do the wrong thing.
Yeah, look, it's to me the important thing is not how hard it is. It's how wrong it is. You know, to me the issue is that it's not the people destroying koala habitat. It's the koalas invading the people's habitat, and it's the green ideology has successfully twisted it around that that the koalas are endangered. I can't stress enough that there are so many more koalas than what there was naturally, and that the reason that they're having the problems of disease and dog attacks and vehicle collisions is because there's too many of them, and they're living in areas where they didn't naturally live. So if we take there's absolutely no problem for the government to achieve their goal of doubling koala populations. As a result of the Black Summer fires, there's so much soft young growth in the forests, and we'll have a look at those other photos of those bugs in the leaves in a minute.
Yeah.
But the funny thing about Black Summer, well, it's not funny. The stupid thing about Black Summer is that before the mega fires, people were being told that no, there's no koalas left anywhere. They're declining and disappearing. And then all of a sudden, when the fires happened, there was koalas being roasted everywhere. Well, the koalas were there were lots of koalas. There was lots more koalas than there should have been, but it's a disaster for the individual koalas that have been incinerated. But it's absolutely no threat to the population, because those mega fires have created an immense amount of soft new growth, and even as we speak, koalas are breeding faster than ever.
Well, then I think the confusing thing for a lot of just people outside this conversation, Regarder, is how does governments and their minions get to a situation where they want to or perceive that koalas should be in areas that weren't originally their range, and they're doing their utmost to keep them or put them into those regions where they were never originally there.
Well, it's a sad indictment on our our level of critical analysis, I suppose, in society, that they managed that their campaigns have been successful. But as I said before, they put a lot of money into it. Actually New South Wales problem, legislative regulation problem, was a trendsetter actually in Australia. I think the New South Wales government listed koalas as vulnerable species in 1992. That was, soon after the National Parks and Wildlife Service campaign started to use koalas as a as a lever to expand their empire, and it's been very successful. And other organisations like Australian Koala Foundation have been equally successful, and even more so World Wildlife Fund, where they've just they've managed to sell the big lie. So people people believe that koalas are in danger, and they're a cute animal, and they're obviously suffering. Individual koalas are suffering a lot of trouble from disease and accidents and dog attacks and things that they shouldn't have to. But it's not because any other reason that there's too many koalas and they're invading territory that they didn't naturally occupy, and the organisations that are making $1 million out of the koala industry are actually increasing koala suffering. They're causing the problem where there's too many koalas and they're diseased and suffering. So the answer is basically that that people need to get back to science and truth instead of emotional green propaganda. But it seems to have gone too far. Right? How can you convince people that want to be that want to be frightened, that want to be worried? It's just there's something wrong with our society.
The other thing is do you think it's also because maybe the science and the people who sort of run the show have brought themselves too far back from the front and put themselves as in offices in Sydney with computers and modelling and accepting lots of data from different people, and they think that's their job rather than being out on the ground and actually going around 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, counting things and actually knowing the environment that they're supposed to be managing or looking after?
Yeah, well, it's a combination of two things, but the bit you're talking about is that about the scientific method, about science is based first and foremost on observation, and once you've observed, you start thinking about what's going on, and you formulate hypotheses about what's going on, and then you go and you test them in the bush and find out whether you're right or wrong. But that's not how science works today in our academic institutions. They don't start from observations, they start from hypotheses or worse, theories that
or desired outcomes. Worse still, with a desired outcome.
Worse. That's the problem. That you got it in a nutshell there, and they don't really need to go into the bush to do that. They just send students into the bush to gather the data to prove their hypotheses, and then they make the models that organise that data to prove their hypotheses. So the basis of science about observation and thinking, it's just not there. It's about proving your ideology these days, and you've only got to look at what are regarded as leading forest scientists in Australia. Their phenomenal rate of publication of books and so-called scientific papers, it illustrates exactly what you're saying. That they simply can't be in the bush and doing any research and doing all this publication and publicity at the same time. So you've got like one of the standouts. Well, I probably shouldn't mention his name. One of the standout professors at ANU, because I can't recall exactly his publication rate, but it's something like a book a book or a scientific paper every 2 weeks. So
you wouldn't get out of the office.
Oh, absolutely not. It's amazing that he finds the time to get on the television and, and to the odd protest.
We might as well go back to those slides with the trees and that, and have a bit of a yak on those ones. I'll just flick them up. There's
we've done that
there.
one. Okay. Yeah, these ones are the bugs chewing the growth. That's the the growth after the black summer fires at Eden. You can see the leaves are all chewed. Some of them have been chewed by those caterpillars that you can see. Others have got the pock marks from some different variety of insect, and you can see the soft shoots have got something else as well on them. If you go to the next one. There you've got some psyllids and with the
what's psyllids?
Oh, that white stuff. You got bugs sheltering under that and sucking the sap, and you can see a beetle over there on the right hand side on that vertical leaf. It's just I actually took these photos after I took a journalist out to show him where we'd been studying koalas in our radio tracking studies, and I'd been trying to explain to him how the megafires aren't a problem for koala populations. They're only a problem for the poor individuals that get incinerated. So that when you have those megafires, everything that eats soft growth absolutely explodes. Now, like I could have given you another dozen photos with another dozen different types of insects from exactly that same little site. But it's just, it's just incredible the explosion of growth that you get of things that eat soft growth, and koalas are one of those things. So koalas, for example, supposedly the last natural population in the Strzelecki Ranges in Victoria, it's been through 20 megafires in the last 200 years, and it's still in unsustainably dense numbers. It's the whole mythology about koalas is wrong, whichever way you look at it. And the fact that they're now suddenly endangered as a result of the bushfires is just absolutely ridiculous. They're, as I said, they're breeding faster than ever as a result of the bushfires. And actually, there's if I can put in a quick plug for Australian Regional and Rural News, there's a webinar coming up next week where the chair of the Threatened Species Scientific Committee that has declared the northern koalas as an endangered species is going to be available to presumably give some explanation about that. But it's a ridiculous situation where an eruptive species that would be recognised as a pest were it not so acute has been declared as an endangered species. But it's not the whole species that's been declared as endangered. The South Australian and Victorian koalas aren't on the threatened species under the Commonwealth environmental legislation. It's only the koalas with postcodes in the 2000s and 4000s. So exactly the same species is either endangered or not endangered according to its postcode. There's absolutely no science behind it whatsoever. It's just based on the manipulation of of people's emotions by the green the koala industry, and they actually managed to back in 2011, they managed to sell the big lie to a Senate committee, and that committee actually accepted that there was tens of millions or 10 million koalas in Australia when Europeans arrived. And, it's an absolute falsehood that, that people didn't see any, but Europeans didn't know that koalas existed for the first 10 years, 15 years.
And it was obviously they didn't live around the Sydney Parramatta area for that time anyway.
Absolutely.
But now they want to see them in downtown Sydney on George Street. And
yeah, well, they nearly are. Like koalas have actually appeared around the nuclear reactor at Lucas Heights, to the not far to the south of Sydney.
Yeah, that's about 40 k's, isn't it?
Yeah, and they've got they've got koala warning signs up on the roads and that, all the rest of it. Like, it's ridiculous that these, the koalas, after koalas supposedly, became endangered in the 80s or 90s or whatever, they just recently, all these warning signs have appeared about, koalas, where koalas were never seen, for 100 years.
It is really a worry how our science is sort of being corrupted as time goes by different organisations and different sort of interests, and they've made inroads into, like say, academia, into the bureaucracy, and it's something that we probably would be hard pressed to get it out and get some common sense in there in the future. But it still all boils back to one thing: poor land management, or the wrong land management. All these problems still stem from that, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know whether we've got time to flick to those couple of photos of a dense forest with a koala in a tree, and then it's burnt out.
Yeah, I'll flick up.
Or
that's the original habitats.
Yeah, can you go to the document with the there's a document with a couple of pictures in it?
Oh, probably not. I probably haven't got that loaded. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, okay, never mind. The like koalas and megafires go together, and koala plagues and megafires go together, and it's a problem of land management, because if you don't burn the bush with frequent mild fire, you get scrub growth, dying trees, soft young shoots, koala plagues, and megafires. They all go together, and the megafires aren't a problem to the koala, the conservation of the koala. They're just a problem to the poor old individual koalas that get incinerated. And it's just madness the way we're mismanaging our bush. We're killing people and animals for no reason other than green ideology, because we're not managing the bush properly.
One thing that sort of really amazes me in regards to forest management, and that is, and in particular forestry and timber harvesting, we've got a massive area of natural forest. I think last count's around about 134 million hectares. We've sort of wound back our logging to there's almost no output, and yet a country like Finland, right, with a mere 23 million hectares, a climate that's not really conducive to fast tree growth, actually logs, I think, about 4 or 5 times more timber per annum than we do. And it's not only that, it sustains more than, of course, the way they divide up the land, a lot of the lots belong to individual families. There's actually a huge number of people that earn a living off those lots. And then also there's a huge amount of super funds and other things that own plots as well and earn an income. Does it surprise you that we've allowed the timber industry to get so badly torn apart in Australia, when we should really be doing our bit to sort of using it in its role to help manage the bush?
Yeah, it's not surprising. It's disgusting. It all comes back to lock it up and let it burn. That's our conservation paradigm is absolute nonsense. It's conservation is wise use of your resources, and if we wisely used our resources, we'd have a much better environment. We'd have genuine biodiversity instead of plagues of a few species. We'd have healthy and safe bush instead of explosive scrub. We wouldn't, people wouldn't be dying and losing their homes the way they are today. And instead of doing that, we're locking it up and let it burn, and we're importing our resources from other countries that doing just as bad a job as what we are, only they haven't got all the rules and regulations to pretend that they're doing a good job.
I think the other thing is too, the ideology out there really vilifies human interaction with the natural environment. And to me, it seems a concerted effort to actually deny human access to these natural A, resources, and B, use of that environment, even for recreation and that. Actually, do you think that humans are that big a vandal that we can't do anything right, that we need to be withdrawn from interacting with nature?
It's absolutely ridiculous that it's again, lock it up and let it burn. The wilderness mentality, it's destructive. It's not only antisocial, but it's anti-environmental. It's like people are a part of the environment. Good Christians understand that God put man to look after the Garden of Eden. We've destroyed the Garden of Eden, and instead of recognizing that it's lack of management, we're blaming climate and all sorts of nonsense. The Aborigines established a totally new ecology and environment around about 40,000 years ago, when they proliferated across the country, and that country depends on human maintenance by frequent wildfire. It depends on it for environmental health and safety and biodiversity and everything that's good. And our conservation paradigm is to keep people out, and it's just Black Summer showed how good it works.
The other thing is too, is it seems quite effective, all the campaigns mounted by these people who use the koalas and polar bears and everything else. It seems to be a very emotive tool that is very successful at wringing the heart and the tears and emptying the pockets. I can't see the other side of this in regards to, look, we need proper management, we need to get in the bush, we need to harvest, we need to do prescribed burning. That's just not going to sell, is it? That's the real problem, is that these people have got the wood over us in regards to the marketing. And I don't know how we're going to get the situation where common sense can sort of override that marketing effectiveness that they've got.
Well, the problem is basically our political system of one person these days. There used to be one man, one vote, but one person, one vote doesn't work when you've got a centralised economy and everyone lives in the city, and elections are decided by inner city Greens. It's the people that actually have the connection with the bush, know how things work, and make their living by genuine production in the bush, by looking after the bush and producing. Those people don't have an equal vote, because the supposed democratic principle gives all the power to the people in the city without any connection, without any knowledge, and absolutely subject to the green ideology and propaganda that millions of dollars get spent on telling lies.
Well, actually, we had David Landini on a couple of weeks ago, and he lives out in the Riverina, and he highlighted that there's more Green voters in total than there are total voters west of the Great Divide. So all the people in what basically is 4/5 of the state, their total votes don't even equal the number of Green votes that are in Sydney, well, the real New South Wales, Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong area. There's more Green voters there than voters in the rest of the people over the west of the Great Divide. And that's the real problem, isn't it? That there are so few people who are living in that real world compared to the people who live in the artificial world of the concrete jungle and urban centres.
Absolutely. The Green Broadcasting Corporation, with their campaign against Joe Bjelke-Petersen. Queensland was great again under Joe because of the so-called gerrymander, where the people that are actually out in the bush that knew what was going on and that were producing the wealth actually had a say in government.
Well, that system of malapportionment was very useful because we had situations up here in Queensland where some seats in the more rural areas, they only needed about 5,000 voters. Then if you're a bit out of the major cities, you needed about 10,000 voters for a seat. But the centres like Cairns, Rockhampton, Brisbane and that, you needed about 15,000 voters to get the seat. So when you had a 76-seat parliament in Queensland in the 70s, a good 45 of those seats or representatives were people from regional Queensland, and they had some clout. But today we have a situation where there's only about 20 regional seats and about 73 basically southeastern Queensland seats, and you're even worse off. I think there's only 8 seats west of the Divide, and you've got 73 seats, east of the Divide, and a heap of them in Sydney. So you're even more hamstrung than we are.
Yeah, and also where we used to have a choice, between conservatives and lefty greenies, we don't. And the current New South Wales government, we've seen that the environment and energy minister and so forth, absolutely worse than the worst Green that you could fear.
But that all comes about that they have to win so many of those seats in Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong area. They've just got to win them, and they've got to appeal to those voters. However, our forefathers didn't give us a solution, Vic. In the Constitution, they provided for the creation of new states, and that's the only way we're going to get out of this, if we can actually convince people that regional New South Wales west of the Divide should be a separate state from that on the around Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong. And same for Queensland. We need the North Queensland state, and we probably need a Riverina state that sort of is partly Victorian and partly New South Wales. So there is a solution, but whether we can ever get it, I don't know.
Yeah, well, Hutt River Province didn't work, did it?
No, well, that was a strange one, but you almost got a new state in 1967 when you had a referendum in New England. You only lost that because the boundaries were a little bit faked in regards to including the population centres of Newcastle and that in the equation, which had nothing to do with the people of New England. But yeah, there has been a movement before, and unfortunately, if we continue down the same track without doing some sort of change, we're only going to get to a situation where there's more and more people poured into those high density areas in our southeast Queensland and in your crescent of Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong. It's just got to get packed with more people. And Melbourne, well, Melbourne's just growing out. It's growing out. It's sort of heading up towards Ballarat now. You're basically saying you're living in Melbourne. So it's a problem we do face.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a pretty serious problem.
If we've just gone over the we've gone over the hour on that. If we just wind up now, is there anything else you want to touch on? Because I'll just flash up the two books that you've got. They're your two current books out. We put a link on the Facebook page. People can click on and go to Amazon and see where they are. So they're the two books. And maybe before we go, maybe you can just touch on the fire stick ecology. What influenced you to write that in the first place? Because I think that was your first offering. Did you say it was 2015?
Yeah, it was 2015 that book came out. It's basically, what I've been saying to you today. Koalas are a subset of our major environmental problem. That our Australian ecosystems need frequent wildfire, to maintain them in a healthy and safe and diverse condition. And our environmental paradigm is completely skewed away from that. It's all wrong, and all our environmental problems, and whether you believe in the climate scam or not doesn't really matter. If you're worried about greenhouse emissions, our biggest single source of greenhouse emissions, so-called greenhouse emissions, is unnecessary, uncontrollable megafires. And so it's a social, environmental problem. If you're that way inclined, it's the biggest part of the climate change problem. It doesn't matter what way you look at it. If we managed our bush with sustainable fire, with mild fire, with frequent mild fire, we would have vastly improved society, economy, and environment.
The other thing is, by harvesting timber, you can capture that carbon for hundreds of years. Because if you go to Europe, you can walk into some old cities, and there's the beam or the shop or the whatever the premises is still held up by beams that are 700 odd years old. So that's great carbon capture. So we can capture some carbon, at least if we harvest it properly, and put it into buildings or furniture or that. We could at least store it for a number of years before recycling it again.
that's one of the biggest lies in the whole climate debate. Is the idea that locking up forests and letting them burn is going to save the, improve the carbon situation. The way that you can capture the most carbon is by harvesting harvesting trees as soon as they reach the necessary size to make a durable product, because the fastest growth of trees is in their youngest years, and the more you harvest, the more you increase the carbon capture potential of the forests.
And I mean, even if you just cut the trees down and then went and throw them in a disused mine and buried them, at least that would store the carbon more effectively than let them just either burn to death with a megafire or eventually fall down in the forest and rot and emit not only carbon dioxide. If it's in a damp forest, it actually produces methane, which is 20 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So letting forests go either by burning or coming to their natural end from old age, it is not helpful at all. Whereas harvesting is.
You don't have to wait until they get old. The carbon accumulation in trees decreases rapidly from a young age. Or it's not, sorry, decreases slowly, increases rapidly at a young age, and it decreases slowly from before the age that they reach, a useful size. So if you're cutting down trees for durable products, once they've reached a durable size for a durable product, you're actually increasing carbon storage way and above what you can have by locking up a forest and letting it burn.
Okay, then we'll wind up now. Any last words? I'd also probably sometime in the future like to have you come back and talk more about the fire stick ecology, because it actually goes back to the roots of Australia before the first people, and also the change of environment and how we should be managing it now.
Yeah, no, thanks very much for the opportunity of talking with you, and I'll be happy to talk with you again anytime.
Right, thanks very much, Vic. Just stay on the line and I'll just introduce next week's show. You better close your ears. You might not want to hear this, Vic. If you've liked our show tonight, please like, follow and subscribe to our Facebook channel, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Next week's show will be with Professor Mark Howden. Professor Mark Howden was a recipient, along with Al Gore, for the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize, and he'll be discussing the workings of the IPC Assessment Group, Working Group 2, Working Group 1, which is the science of climate change. So he'll be on next week. Join us then, and thanks very much.